Hey there, and welcome to the Divorce Planner Podcast. I'm divorce prep coach Alex Beatty. One of the most daunting tasks is figuring out how to tell your spouse you want a divorce. Just the idea of the talk can lead to sleepless nights, turning questions over in your mind like, when should you bring it up? Where? What do you actually say? And how can you stay calm if emotions run high? Today, I'm talking to relationship coach and associate therapist Kim Polinder about how to approach one of life's most challenging conversations with intention and respect. Kim specializes in helping people navigate difficult relationship transitions, and she shared valuable insights about initiating this difficult but important conversation. We talk about choosing the right time and place, what to say and what to avoid, managing unexpected reactions, and protecting your mental health during this difficult conversation. If you're preparing to have the talk or wondering how to even begin this conversation, this episode has the practical guidance you need. Let's dive in. I was really happy to have this conversation because I feel like this subject isn't really talked about a lot, right? People are usually winging it. But when you get to a point in a relationship where you realize it's really time to end things, and if you're married, that means with a divorce, bringing this conversation up can be incredibly intimidating. And it also sets the tone for what's going to happen moving forward. This is really about a conversation that is going to tonally set the groundwork for moving forward with an actual divorce. And so the stakes couldn't be higher. And usually when you've gotten to this point, there are a lot of different scenarios. You could be coming out of a scenario where you've had terrible communication for a long time and there are resentments, or maybe one person is a little heated and doesn't handle this well. So today is really about giving people tips and tools to handle it. And I'm just going to jump in. I have about 7 questions that I'm going to go through. So as a relationship coach, you've probably seen both sides, successful and challenging divorce conversations. What are some of the most common misconceptions that people have about the talk, and how can they better prepare themselves before having it?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that it's just going to be one big talk and then it's done. And that is not the case at all, because generally, when it comes to a breakup, when it comes to divorce, there's always one person who wants it more than the other. You can say that, oh, it was mutual, but that's never the case. There's always just one person who wants it a little bit more. There's always one person who has a hope of saving it. So just understand that while you may be very resolved when you come and have the talk, you've had months, maybe a year to think about it. And this other person is having the rug pulled out from under them, potentially. So it's a process, it's a series of conversations, and to just be very mindful of the way that you bring up the topic. Research shows that those first 3 minutes are very key when it comes to tone, warmth, respectful phrasing, shall we say, without it like you, and the blame, being able to own what your position is, and just be empathetic that this may be the first time this other person is hearing that, oh, we're at that place. And just one other piece of, request based on the work I've done with couples is, if you are getting to that point, don't wave the flag unless you're really serious. Because when people threaten divorce and breakups all the time, and then it starts to become just this kind of way to distract from the actual argument or the issue, and wow, we should just get divorced. But that's a very unsettling thing for people to hear, especially if you have abandonment issues. So if you're going to actually have the talk, be very ready to be at that position. Otherwise, it's just an emotional roller coaster for your partner.
I really appreciate that you said that, right? Divorce is like yelling fire in a crowded room. Make sure that you are not crying wolf. Even if you've been in a terrible relationship dynamic, it still deserves a respectful approach. What's the saying? To get the partner you want, you need to be the partner you want. And that counts for even bringing things to a close, operate in a way that you would want to be treated. I'd love to hear a little bit more about this. You said there's a 3-minute rule in terms of these types of conversations. Can you expand a little bit on that? This is such great information.
Yeah, the research comes from the Gottmans, where they looked at just all kinds of engineering structure when it comes to communication. And one of the things they noticed is that how you open a conversation in those first 3 minutes, it determines generally it contributes to how the conversation plays out, where I forget the exact statistic, but it's over 65% of the time in those first 3 minutes, if you come in with a controlled tone, if you take the time to say, is now a good time? That's another key factor of having this talk is let's not just bombard the other person, set a time. Hey, I have something that I need to talk to you about. When is a good time? Is now a good time? If not, you back off to just give yourself all the success that you can. But just how you come in, if you're going to come in hot, realize that there's a bigger chance that the conversation could explode. So if you want to give yourself the best chance to have a productive conversation, just be very mindful of how you drop into it.
I really love that you brought up the fact that kind of prepare yourself that this is the beginning of a conversation. You're probably going to have to revisit it at different times. And it reminds me for all of our parents out there who are married and maybe dealing with this point in your marriage, treat it the way that you would treat speaking to a child. I'm not trying to insult the other person. What I'm trying to give you kind of guidance on is just the same way you wouldn't like vomit out a lot of information to a toddler all at once about like, okay, now we're going to leave and you have to switch gears really quickly. You have to kind of apply that same thing to this conversation with your spouse just to understand that you're going to be kind of dropping a bomb, right? And so be mindful. You are going to be there to kind of take care of that other person a little bit, but also just to start the conversation.
Yeah, because in your mind, you may think, well, we fight all the time. Like, and you've said that, we might be better off and all this stuff. And so it should come as no surprise when I bring up a divorce. But in the other person's mind, they may say, well, yeah, we fight all the time, but I didn't think you were going to, we made a vow. Like, what is this? So you never know how your partner is approaching conflict and what they think of all the conflict in your relationship.
I completely agree with you. There is so much anxiety that can come no matter what your dynamic is about this conversation because we're playing out usually like 6 steps ahead or there's this tension or there can be a myriad of factors as to why it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because it's a hard thing to say. It's a really hard thing to be the person to draw a line in the sand because there is a lot of weight to it and it is going to begin the end of a chapter in both of your lives. I just kind of want to like switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about preparing. So when someone's preparing for this conversation, how do you help them balance being honest about their feelings, but still maintaining respect and composure? Like, are there specific phrases or approaches that you found are really, really successful for people having this kind of conversation?
I think this goes down to basic communication skills. And it doesn't matter if divorce is the topic or if you're talking about, how someone disappointed you or you're talking about your needs in the relationship. It's all based on the same core features. First is empathy. Let's back up a little bit more before that might be gratitude, where you're going to have a heavy conversation and you start out with a little bit of gratitude. It could be maybe you're to a point where you just can't stand your partner and you want out of this marriage. Maybe it'll be like appreciation that they're even sitting down, having a focused conversation. And maybe that's just the most gratitude you can muster up. But even that is something. So a little bit of gratitude, then being able to, when you're speaking your position and your feelings, to use the I statements, that classic thing that we always hear about, like people roll their eyes like, okay, I statements. But what we're talking about with I statements is you're talking about your emotional experience. A lot of times people confuse thoughts and feelings. Like, I feel that you have been really selfish in this relationship. That is not a feeling. That is a thought and it is a judgment. And the other person is going to immediately become defensive. Whereas if you can come into a conversation focusing on feelings, that's the purpose of I statements is I feel and get out of feelings wheel. I feel really lonely in this relationship. I feel really sad. I feel hopeless. I feel, and to stick to emotions, it's harder you're not commenting on a person's character or they're going to need to jump to defend their character. Now you're talking about your feelings. Another key element is when you're expressing this news, this perspective of like, hey, maybe we should call it quits. Expect that they're going to be upset. A lot of people think that, well, if I just say it a certain way, then they won't be upset. Or a lot of people think that they shouldn't be upset. It's logical. I laid it out logically. I use that 3-minute rule. Why are they upset?
Yeah.
No, you have to allow the person to be
Yeah.
upset. and that's okay. So when it comes to being afraid to have a divorce conversation, I would argue, I would guess that that person just in general has trouble bringing up conflict,
Mm.
has a great fear of confrontation, has a great issue with expressing their needs in a relationship, for the fear of being too much, for the fear of not acknowledging what they, giving them a seat at the table, so to speak. So these things, they're a bigger commentary on a person and how they approach conflict.
I really encourage my coaching clients to practice what they're going to say. Get comfortable with how they feel saying something out loud. And also, it allows you to kind of edit because sometimes you can hear, like, oh, well, maybe if somebody said that to me, like it would feel like an attack. And so be mindful of that, especially because, as I said, this is going to set the tone moving forward. So it's important to have this. And if you get to this point, this conversation isn't the time to hash out, you said, I said, I'm right, you're wrong. This is a different kind of conversation. Those more often than not have been happening, or they might happen during the divorce process, but that's not what this is for, because you can't argue with, this doesn't feel right anymore. I don't feel that I want to be in this relationship, and bringing that gratitude and that empathy to it. And I know that there are going to be some people out there who are like, I am grateful to be divorcing. We're all human. We're all doing the best we can. I know that there are some extreme situations out there. I'm not talking about that. This is like just very broad information. And as opposed to, if you are in a DV situation, that is a very different thing. And we both understand and respect that. We'll be back after a quick break. Feeling overwhelmed about the possibility of a divorce and not sure where to start? Book a free 15-minute strategy call with me. During our time, we'll talk about where you are in the process and what next steps could be. To schedule your call and learn more about my coaching program, head over to www.thedivorceplanner.net/coaching. Let's get back to today's episode. Talking about unexpected reactions, right? Being able to hold space for somebody, letting somebody have a reaction in a way that you don't have to feel like you have to immediately respond to. Like, what are some grounding techniques that you can recommend when emotions start running high for either person during this conversation?
Even before you have the conversation, box breathing, oldie but goodie, where it's slow breath in for 4 seconds. Hold it for 4 seconds, slowly let it out, exhale through the mouth for 4 seconds, hold it at the end for 4 seconds, and just do that for a few rounds before you talk. It helps regulate the nervous system. It helps convince your brain that there's not danger. You're trying to work with your body, because fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system, all the cortisol, the adrenaline, that's a real thing. And it tends to limit our executive function, meaning our ability to hear, our ability to speak, think clearly. All that may be triggered if you're having a really difficult conversation and if you fear the other person's response. So it's really important, if you can. Breathing is one way. Another way is, you can Google this, anyone, progressive muscle relaxation. It's where you go through different parts of the body, just tense it, relax, tense it, relax. That can be done in like 20 seconds, a really fast version. There are regulation techniques of like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pick 5 things in the room you see, call them out. 4 things you can feel, just touching things. 3 things you can hear, and just going through the 5 senses that way. Just again, and there are different versions of using the senses. Like, what is something you taste right now? It just kind of keeps the mind busy and distracted. Again, it's kind of a regulation technique. So
I'm going to be honest, I did the muscle tense and relax as you said it, and I feel pretty good. So you're taking care of yourself in advance of going into this, right? So that you're in the best position to have this conversation. And I would also say, just keep in mind, as I said before, treat the other person the way you would want to be treated. That should be kind of the headline as you approach this. I'm not talking about, well, I'm angry and I want to make them pay. It's just about that time, about gratitude, about being present, about taking care of yourself by having this conversation in a way that reflects your values, right? And for a lot of people who are going to bring up the divorce subject, just because you're going to get a divorce doesn't mean you're not going to see that person anymore. There are a lot of people out there who have kids, and just because mom and dad, or dad and dad, or mom and mom aren't married anymore, doesn't mean you're still not family. You are. The family is just shape shifting. So make sure these conversations are another opportunity to, again, set the tone as this shift happens in your family dynamic. Speaking of parents, understanding that this conversation has layers of complexity attached to it. How do you advise clients about timing and logistics if kids are involved, especially with regard to things right after? Because our lives don't just stop. You have parents who are like, oh, now I have to pick up kids from school, or we have to do homework, or what have you. Do you have any tips on how to navigate the immediate after when you have kids?
Yeah, when it comes to just having the talk, really focus on just that empathy piece, the emotional piece, them reacting to it, you reacting to it, versus, okay, we have the talk. Now we go into logistics. Like, who's going to pick up the kids next week? Where am I going to live? You slow down the conversation to really attune to feelings, to be able to show a little empathy, have some understanding. And then when you feel that, you're getting to a place of, all right, what does this look like going forward? Then once again, you sit down with your partner, figure out, what does this look like? And I'm not sure if you're asking about when to tell the kids or so, but at the point that it is communicated to the children, then you have a united front versus someone who's just had one conversation about we're breaking up, forced into this weird, like this new childcare co-parenting situation, and they're still in shock. And then you're telling the kids, and you want to be a united front when it comes time to, like, here's what life looks like going forward.
Completely agree with you. I actually was just talking with someone who the spouse brought up the idea of divorce. And then the next thing this person knew, had a conversation with the kids. Just remember, they are not in control of any of this happening. And shit happens, right? Everyone's throwing challenges in life. People lose jobs, people get sick, sometimes relationships end, sometimes family kind of reconfigure in this way. But you're driving this, right? Even if you're on the receiving end of this divorce talk, you have to remember to protect children. And this is grown up stuff. And between grown-ups and their children, this is not something that they don't need to go behind the curtain. You know what I mean? It's really about taking care of them as best as possible. So kind of circling back to the unexpected reactions that can come up during the conversation, what can you do if you're noticing that you're kind of starting to get hot under the collar, or maybe your spouse is it's going beyond just, okay, I'm thrown off guard. I'm in shock. I'm processing this, but maybe starts to border on something a little meaner. Like, how can people navigate that?
Forget about empathy skills and expressing your needs skills and all that. De-escalation is a skill in and of itself. And taking a break is always a good thing. Now, the problem with taking a break is that generally in a relationship, there's typically an anxious and avoidant dynamic where there's a push-pull dynamic. One partner tends to shut down, pull away. The other person tends to chase after them. And so the person who's chasing is like, I don't want to give them a break, because if they take a break, they're never coming back. So that has to be navigated. But in general, objectively speaking, taking a break, de-escalating is a very good thing to do when things are starting to get heated. You're going towards that place where you're going to say things you regret, hit below the belt. Take a break. When you take a break, it's good to say, hey, I really want to talk to you about this. We're not finished talking about this, obviously. I'm afraid I'm going to start saying something I regret. I can tell things are starting to deteriorate.
Mhm.
Let's take a 20-minute break and let's check in 20 minutes. So when you take a break, set a time when you're going to check in. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's tomorrow morning. And then at that time, check in with each other. If you're still not ready to talk, still heated, all right, let's check in again in the evening. Because at some point it's going to become very unproductive. Both people are going to be drowning in their triggers. And when you're drowning in your triggers and the lens at which you see your partner through, and you just can't hear anything else, it's not productive
Yeah.
to continue.
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer. It's a step by step guide, basically, if things are getting heated, what to do. Just being able to acknowledge that, if the other person is the one who's getting heated, to say, hey, look, I know this is a lot to process right now. Let's push pause on this to give us both time to kind of process and then come back so it can be a productive conversation. We'll be right back after a quick break. Subscribe to the Divorce Planner's weekly newsletter and get divorce prep tips, financial planning tools, and expert insights delivered discreetly to your inbox. Sign up at www.thedivorceplanner.net. Let's get back to today's episode. How can you be a united front when one partner does not want to split? We need to talk to the kids, their teens, and asking questions.
Yeah. Like I said at the beginning, generally one partner is not on board. There can be empathy. Look, I understand that you think there's still hope for this marriage. I don't agree. So that whole agree to disagree position, because you don't necessarily have to have both parties agreeing in order to, like, okay, now we proceed with the divorce. If you are that convinced with the divorce, obviously, it's hard to comment on a relationship when I don't have any details of it. But if you're that convinced that this is for sure not the marriage for me, and that person is in denial, then it's going to have to be you moving forward. Look, I understand that this is really difficult and that you don't want to move forward, but here are what I see as next steps and moving forward with the next steps.
Yeah. And I think that that's great because this talk can also lead to let's try a separation, right? So that there could be other steps that are going to happen. I would just piggyback on what you were saying, Kim, just to say, whenever possible, as we discussed, being able to have this conversation together with your children, even practicing what you're going to say before you have the conversation with your kids. And remember that just as Kim said about bringing this up with a spouse, you've had time to process this. Or if this was a conversation your spouse had with you, you've taken your time to process it, to come to terms with it. But when you're dealing with having this conversation with your children, again, it depends a lot on what you're going to say on their age, right? Because developmentally, whether you're talking to elementary school or middle schoolers or high schoolers or college, it's really different. So make sure that you prepare in advance of that conversation and give yourself some tools, right? Like I'm always saying, utilize your pediatrician. Your pediatrician is a great resource to be able to tap in. I have to have this conversation. Do you have any resources that I can look to? I just have one more question that I kind of want to wrap things up on. There is a silver lining to this, right? So it's like once you start this conversation, when you've prepared thoughtfully and you handle it as best as possible, and that doesn't mean perfect. It's like if you're going in with that gratitude, with that intention, with that empathy for yourself and for your partner, that's all you can do, right? And everything beyond there is you'll try to get through as best as possible. But looking back on your experience coaching clients through this kind of a process, what's one unexpected positive outcome that you've seen from couples who approached the talk thoughtfully and with preparation?
Well, it's interesting because in the last, I don't know, it seems to be a trend in the last year. I increasingly am getting clients who come to me and say, in the first session, we filed for divorce. We are here because we want to get to a good place with co-parenting. We're still like bickering a lot and we're not getting back together, but please help us with communication. One of the good things is that even in those situations where the papers have been filed, I still see one particular partner who's just holding a little bit of hope in those sessions that maybe you'll get to a place of reconciliation. But even so, I find that in those talks where, okay, one person finally feels like it's safe, like, okay, I moved out, they feel a little more empowered and more truth comes out. This is actually what I was upset about in the marriage. And for whatever reason, they couldn't bring it up in the marriage. And it's eye opening to the other partner, like, oh, I had no idea. So that's one good thing. Another thing is it forces people into a place of, I should say, it gives people an opportunity to move to a place of accountability. Okay, I realize now exactly what you were missing. I realize how I actually fell short. And so it's a real opportunity to really take inventory of how you showed up in this marriage for either side. Whoever's initiating, whoever's receiving it, either side, to take inventory of how you showed up in this relationship. Because if there's a lot of unprocessed stuff where your triggers took over and your PTSD and whatnot took over, you can break up with this person. To all the people who are initiating divorce,
Yeah.
you can break up with this person. But if you haven't looked at the process and your triggers and what made you so upset about this person, I'm not saying they're an angel, but whatever you were triggered about in this person, sure, break up with them, but you will recreate that exact same dynamic in your next relationship. Or you will find a new relationship that where, oh, I'm finally with a not abusive person. They're so kind and they're so thoughtful and loving. Now I'm bored. This is all stuff that comes up when you're unaware of the patterns and what you bring into a relationship. So huge opportunity for introspection and what you bring to the table.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. And if you haven't been able to be in a place to take accountability, if you haven't been in a place that was open to looking at what your role is, and we all have a role, in these situations, you are going to repeat it. And if you're pretending it doesn't exist and you're blocking it out, it will bite you in the ass and it's going to recreate itself so that it forces you. These things come up time and time again. It's like, hello, you still haven't dealt with it. It's coming right back to you. I'm going to make sure that you do. And it's an opportunity for growth, as you said, Kim, for deep introspection, to figure out who you are now, what kind of life you want to be living, and to make sure that it is the healthiest version of you moving forward. We all make mistakes. We all have the highs and lows. Embracing yourself with kindness as you go through this process and being able to hold the space for somebody else is really like the most humane thing that you can do for you and them. Kim, thank you so much for having this conversation. I so value your insights and your expertise. That's a wrap on today's episode. I hope you found it helpful. For more free resources, check out my blog at www.thedivorceplanner.net/blog. You'll find articles on how to emotionally and financially prepare for divorce, gain insights into the process from divorce experts, and empower yourself with tips and tools that make your divorce journey easier. And you can follow me on Instagram at the.divorce.planner, on Facebook at Divorce Prep, and on YouTube at The Divorce Planner for daily divorce prep tips and support. I've helped hundreds of clients and thousands more with my digital divorce prep tools prepare for divorce, and I'd be honored to support you too. I'm Alex Beatty, and this has been the Divorce Planner Podcast. Until next time, remember, divorce is hard. Preparing for one doesn't have to be.